Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Right, Left, Up, Down podcast. Any views expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of any organizations that the host or co-hosts belong to. Would our co-hosts like to introduce themselves?
Absolutely. I can go first. This is Anushka Pandey. I'm the president of the College Democrats of Indiana University.
And I'm Dylan Burns, and I'm the president of College Republicans at IU.
Here we are, episode 3. Today we're going to be talking about Antifa, and then we're going to be talking about AI.
Fun duo.
Yeah, it's fun. A lot of acronyms today.
Yeah.
But kind of touching on what we talked about last time, Utah now joins 3 other states in requiring gun safety in K-12 education.
Really?
You know what?
Like teaching gun safety?
Mm-hmm.
No, that's awesome.
I
that's
applaud
awesome.
that.
We
I'm surprised it's coming out of Utah. That's awesome.
Yeah, we kind of touched on that with, what was it, Switzerland?
Yeah, I think Switzerland was the European country I was discussing.
Yeah. You said one of 3?
One of...
Does it list the other states?
I was going to ask that, yeah.
It's one of 3. I don't know what the other 2 are. Arkansas and Tennessee.
Interesting. What a random
Absolute
combination.
Tennessee W. Another reason why it's one of my favorite states.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have been able to guess those 3 states, but I support.
Tim Peck for Congress.
Tim Peck for Congress. Oh my God, was that an endorsement from
not
College
an
Republicans
endorsement.
president
That is
Dylan
not,
Burns?
let me clarify,
Yeah,
that is not an endorsement. I'm simply reading the sticker.
Yeah, I've
off
got
of
2.
Anushka's water
Yeah.
bottle.
We're going to
Tim
open and
Peck all
close
the
the
way.
podcast with that clip.
Tim Peck all the way, now endorsed by College Republicans President Dylan Burns.
Definitely not the case.
No.
I'm sure Tim is a good human being, but not an endorsement.
Nah, fair enough.
Probably
He
an
is a
okay
great
dentist.
Huh?
Isn't he a dentist?
He's
Is
an
he a
ER
dentist?
doctor.
Oh, I thought he was a
Why is
dentist.
he running for Congress?
Because our healthcare system's messed up.
He makes so much money
Well-
and has such a cushy life compared to being a congressperson.
I mean,
I mean, he'll probably be, if he wins,
He
he'll
lives
probably
on a
be there for 2 terms. That's 4 years, then he'll go back to being a doctor. So.
He lives on a farm and works in like a rural hospital.
I want to live on a farm.
Oh my God, his farm is so beautiful. You have no idea.
Why did I think he was a dentist?
I don't know.
I was
Does
like,
he give off dentist vibes?
I could have swore I
Oh,
read
I'm
that
so
he was
gonna
a
say this to
dentist.
him just because it's so funny. I think I see him on like Friday. I'm gonna make fun of him so much.
I'm like fairly certain that on his like Ballotopedia page it says he's a dentist. He's
There's
a
no
practicing
way.
dentist in Indiana.
He is an ER physician. Yeah.
So I guess to get into today's main topic, let's talk about Antifa. And I thought that the best way to start would be to discuss what FA is first. Because it seems like most people don't know what fascism is or what it means. What do you think, without Googling it, what is fascism?
Defined by militaristic hyper-nationalism, government by a few against minorities, and I don't know, minorities is a really broad statement, but that's the characteristics that come to mind for me.
What would you think?
I would say ultra-militaristic and authoritarian government still hiding under the guise of some sort of like democratic structure.
That's valid.
Okay. I've always heard fascism described from the angle of it being like an exclusively right-wing thing, of it being a conservative thing.
No.
Google AI, which is foreshadowing for later in the episode, Google AI's definition of fascism is a far-right authoritarianism, ultra-nationalist political ideology characterized by a centralized dictatorship.
Yeah, I would disagree with that definition.
Yeah.
So let me I
But
guess
before we go on, here's the dictionary definition.
Okay.
I'm going to give this to everybody. Like the actual dictionary definition of fascism is a populist political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual, that is associated with a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, and that is characterized by severe economic and social regimentation and by forcible suppression of opposition.
I think there's... I don't know if I would disagree with the democratic part, though. I think that's fair. Where, like, the distinction between fascist and pure authoritarian would be the guise of democratic governance. I think that... I would agree with that part of Dylan's definition.
I like the actual dictionary definition a lot. I think
me too.
That's a great way of summing it up. uses a lot more big words than I would have.
Yeah, I kind of boil it down to it that it's, to use smaller words, it's basically loyalty to something above the individual.
Sure.
To boil it all the way down.
Maybe that's a little too...
A little too boiled down,
Yeah.
but yeah. Any thoughts on that?
I do like people talk about fascism all the time. I guess just for me, I feel like fascism is something that's, at least in my head, hard to distinguish, because when I think of like when I start listing off different types of governments or governmental structures, like you got a democracy, a democratic republic, you've got a monarchy, an autocracy, a theocracy, a dictatorship, an oligarchy, like stuff like
junta.
that. Huh?
A junta. I always love saying that one.
What's that?
It's like a military.
Oh,
run.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I get what you're talking about, because it starts with a J.
Yeah, a lot of people call it a junta, but it's a junta.
Junta. Yeah. I guess my underlying thing between all those is like who's in charge. Like democracy, like straight democracy is like people. Representative democracy is like you elect people to govern. A monarchy is a king. Theocracy is the church or whatever religion. A junta is the military. A dictatorship or an autocracy is like a single individual or maybe like two people. An oligarchy is, you've got maybe a handful or a couple dozen.
And there can always be overlaps.
And there can always be overlaps. Yeah. And then you say fascism, and I feel like fascism doesn't...
It doesn't fit with any of those necessarily.
Yeah.
I see fascism as more of a degree of any of those. Does that make
And
sense?
I think it's more defined by political, like ideological characteristics than it is by like form of government. Which is why I disagreed with like the left wing versus right wing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's like characteristics rather than like a broader... I just jumbled those words together. But yeah, I think like you could have a fascist dictatorship or a fascist oligarchy.
Does anyone have anything else to say about fascism before we move on to Antifa?
I think this is me trying to be a better person, and I will admit that I do this too. I think fascism is something that gets thrown around a lot.
Sure.
By people that either don't really know what fascism is, in which case they're ignorant, or they know what fascism actually is and they know what they're calling fascist is not fascist, in which case that's lying. Not good, either way, in my opinion. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot by people about things that aren't actually fascist. I think fascism and fascist isn't the only thing in our society that's getting thrown around a lot. I think we probably throw... Communism, and I'll be honest, every time I pay for parking, I yell, I say this is some communist plot. I hate paying.
How the heck is that communist?
It's not.
That's capitalism at its peak.
I know.
Holy crap!
And
here we have the problem with the Republican Party. No, I'm kidding.
I just hate paying for parking.
Yeah, that's capitalism.
I do.
My good friend.
It is capitalism. It just annoys me.
So you're a communist, but only when it comes to parking.
Oh, if I became president, I would.
Free parking.
My number
for all?
one thing would be doing away with all, not private parking, but I would outlaw people charging for parking.
Do you know how much like tax revenue that would take away from cities and stuff? Anyway, I'm just glad we have that on the record for when it's 2050 and it's me versus Dylan Burns. I might actually lose on that topic.
Dylan in his parking garage stalling.
He's not entirely capitalistic. He wants to
just parking garages. I will give Bernie's always been on this socialist kick, and we're not going to do health care, but by golly, we're going to do parking spaces.
That's going to be your campaign.
That's going to be my campaign right there.
It's like, vote for me and park wherever you please.
Whoa!
Park wherever you damn well please.
That's good.
That's the campaign. Hey, listen, governor run with that slogan.
You'll win Bloomington.
You'll win
Dub. But all jokes aside, I think we also throw like socialist and communist around
jihadist
too.
Terrorists.
I personally have not thrown those two around, nor have I heard a lot of people.
I've seen a lot of that.
I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm just speaking from personal experience. I haven't seen that a lot. I'm sure it does happen though. we throw a lot of these ists and isms around to describe like political or ideological things or whatever, and we're just doing it to do it, and we're trying to do it to like inflict malice and stuff and not try and engage in an actual intellectual conversation about what these ists and isms are and how, you know, we can not just be calling everything, you know, communism or everything fascist or everyone a communist and everybody a fascist or jihadist, terrorist, whatever, right? And so I think that is like a first step we as a society need to take, is trying to speak more. We have lost the importance of the meaning of words, I think, to a certain
That's so
degree.
fair, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what I would say about that.
Did we have any more to say about...
Well, I feel like we haven't talked Antifa yet.
Yeah, like before
okay.
we get to Antifa.
I had really good tacos for lunch.
You did?
He's trying to avoid the topic.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying.
All right. Antifa, go.
You have to start this.
The
The reason you have to start this is because the way it's being talked about is so hyper specific by the Republican side that it's its own thing that's separate from Antifa at the beginning and what it stands for and what it actually is, which is a decentralized ideological identity.
If
Anti-fascist.
it was a decentralized ideological identity, why is there a website? It seems quite centralized.
Because somebody wrote a book about being anti-fascist.
Centralized.
There's no organization structure. It's like the Democratic Party. That's a joke. No, there's no organization structure. There's no membership. There's no hierarchy. It's literally just people say they identify with it or they don't. That's all it is. I could say I'm Antifa right now and it would mean absolutely nothing other than me saying those words because there isn't a formal entity called Antifa. Somebody wrote a book that lays out how to be anti-fascist. And so if there's a website, I'm assuming it's his website. But that doesn't mean that the whole movement is defined by that website. It's not like the KKK, you know what I mean?
I mean, sure. Yeah.
That's why I think you need to start this conversation in like the modern sense of what Antifa is and what the centrality of this conversation is going to be. Because from my perspective, it doesn't exist as a central entity.
I guess we can debate the nuances of what constitutes a centralized or decentralized organization. I don't think you can... Antifa, in my opinion, is not an ideology. And because it's not an ideology, because it is a thing you can be, it has some level of inherent membership to it. So sure, while there might not be some like head leader of some official group, protests still happen, events still get planned, action still gets taken.
Can you name me one protest that was an Antifa-only protest that wasn't organized by a different group? Just one.
If I had the opportunity to go to Google, I could.
Go ahead.
I'll allow Google.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, this is my thing. We can look at the protests recently that people there, like the No Kings protests, the people there would probably self-identify as Antifa, anti-fascist, as an ideological statement. That being said, the protest itself, depending on which one you talk about, was organized here by Indivisible, by 5051, by the No Kings coalition that has been created nationally, by the county party, again, depending on which one you go to. Those were the organizers, but people there, maybe a large percentage of people there, I'll agree with that, would consider themselves Antifa because of the statement. I think if we go to like the extreme example at the other end, I think it would be like saying that white supremacy is a political group. It's not. There's people who, openly or not, would consider themselves white supremacists. There's certain groups that take that and run with it, the KKK. There's a KKK website. That doesn't mean that everybody who's a white supremacist is a member of the KKK. And it also isn't fair to be like, to automatically equate MAGA to white supremacy. I think there's a lot of overlap, in my opinion. Just like you could say that the left wing of the Democratic Party has a lot of overlap with Antifa. But I think it's a subgroup, and at the point where, yes, we can debate what it means to be an organization, but at the point where the best you've pointed to is a website that isn't even, I didn't even know about it, that is the author of one book on fascism, anti-fascism. There's no hierarchical structure, there's no membership, there's no, subgroup system. Like, none of that exists. I don't think you can say that there's any sort of organization. Have you returned from your Googling?
Yeah, Google is not cooperating with me, so I unfortunately don't have anything to share from Google.
I did my research on this because I knew I was right and I needed to back it up.
Oh. Like, you mentioned the white supremacy aspect. Like, the angle I was going to go at was, like, is saying that Antifa is centralized and has, like, a leader and has protest is like saying that racism is centralized and has a leader and has protests.
That's my take on it as well.
Like, there are people that are very racist and that love being racist and will go out and scream and, like, do, like, some of the things in Charlottesville, for example. But that doesn't mean there's, like, a organization of racism. It kind of can penetrate everything.
Cool. I mean, I think those are both fair assessments.
I mean, you can disagree.
Here's I am not as educated on, like, what Antifa is from what a little bit I've seen on Google, like, and I feel like I acknowledged this at the start that there wasn't, like, some central leader or figurehead or whatever. So sure, I can concede that maybe it's more of an ideological perspective than it is an individual organization. That being said, I think it is a what would have started out is a maybe inherently virtuous ideological perspective has since been warped and has led to negative things.
If I can be very blunt.
Sure.
Are you only saying that because it's now going after the president that you voted for?
No.
Because, like, what do you mean by that? Like, how has it been warped? Because I feel like the only thing that's changed is that it's now going after, like, maybe this is an oversimplification, but it's now going after the sitting president that a lot of people still agree with.
I don't think it has necessarily anything to do with going after Trump himself. I think part of the problem is, yes, people attacking Trump, but less of them attacking Trump and more of them attacking the presidency. I think anybody that tries to make a claim that Trump is a fascist, to quote John Kennedy, has been smoking the devil's lettuce. I genuinely don't see how you can make any claim whatsoever that he is one. And so I think people that are trying to go after President Trump and say that he is a fascist, I think, is definitely on a different planet.
Can we break down the definition of fascist?
Can you pull up the Merriam-Webster definition again, please?
I feel like we should go. No, I feel like this is genuine.
Yeah.
I think that people definitely, like we already talked about, misuse the word commonly.
Yes.
But I think we should go through the definition that we agreed upon at the beginning and see where you don't think it applies to Trump.
Okay.
I'll go through it.
Are you on
piece by
Merriam-Webster?
piece. Yes. Yeah. A populist political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts nation above the individual, and in parentheses, often race. So not always race, doesn't have to be about race. And that is associated with a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader. So not necessarily a dictator, but a dictatorial leader.
Okay. Start at the beginning. Or I'll just ask this, Dylan, which parts do you disagree with? Because I think dictatorial is, like, the most open for interpretation, but I think the rest of it applies.
Here's the thing. A populist political philosophy that has defined American politics for the last decade and a half.
Sure.
I would agree with that.
So I think that checks. I think both political parties check that box.
Sure.
Philosophy, movement. I mean, again, movement that checks everybody's box.
Yep.
That exalts nation. And sometimes often, whatever word you want to use there, race above the individual. Not even discussing race, because I don't think that's an issue. I am curious when it says exalts nation above the individual.
I've got something to say here.
Because how is that, I guess, before you go, like, how is exalts nation above the individual? How's that not just patriotism? Because I feel like that's how I would define patriotism, is love for the country, but then putting the country before me.
The fine line, we were initially going to make this its own episode, but I don't think it's really a whole episode worthy, but it fits really good here. The canary in the coal mine when it comes to fascism, for me, is flag burning.
Ooh.
Because it is enshrined in the Constitution that the people should be able to protest their government, the redressing of grievances, the whole thing. All right? At the very least, to ban people from burning the American flag is a very slippery slope, because you're criminalizing dissatisfaction with the government. Thoughts on that?
I would agree with that.
I mean, I think flag burning is abhorrent, but I support anybody's right to do that.
Yeah, it's a recognized.
I mean, yeah, I disagree with it, but
sure,
I disagree. People do a lot of dumb stuff with their rights that I disagree with, but I support.
I think it's a
them to have
very
the right regardless.
symbolic gesture, though, because what most Americans, obviously not all Americans, I'm not going to generalize, most Americans would say is that they genuinely love their country. And to go after the flag in that case is necessarily symbolic. I think it's the same type of thing as kneeling during the national anthem, right? The point is that they love their country, and so to go against a visual of that country is proving that they don't like the state of the country. That's how I see it.
The way I've always seen that is when somebody does that, when they kneel or when they burn a flag, they're not protesting the country, they're protesting the government as it is at that moment.
I agree.
It's the government of the country that they're disagreeing with.
And I also think that, that, there's a quote I really like. Albert Camus, I think, is Camus, I don't know, the philosopher, who says I should like to be able to love my country and still love justice. That's one that's really stood out to me, because I think that to love your country is to point out and try to fix its flaws. And so I think that if criminalizing or even, talking negatively about criticisms of a government or a country just because the criticism exists, I think I kind of lost track of my own sentence, I'll be honest. But I think that being discouraged or made illegal is putting the country above everything else. Saying that progress doesn't matter. Saying that whatever the issue at hand is doesn't matter, because the country in its purest form and its form as it is right now in the status quo must come first. I think that would be, I think saying otherwise would be going against a lot of progress that's been made in the name of creating a better America.
And back to what I said about when you do things like this, you're protesting the government, not the country. Fascism occurs when government and country are married together into one concept. And protesting the government is seen as protesting the country, and therefore the argument can be made that you're protesting all of the ancestors that have lived in that country. You're not like the government does something you don't like and you speak up against it. You're speaking up against everybody that's ever died in any war. You're speaking up against everything. Like, you're not just disrespecting the president, you're disrespecting the entirety of the nation. And that becomes a very slippery slope, because once you ban flag burning, what comes after that, it's distasteful depictions of the flag. Like, you can't draw it in a dirty way or something. Then are we going to be arresting people for letting the American flag touch the ground? And then at what point are we just, when does it get to the point where just saying anything bad about the U.S. government is enough to get you put in jail just because it's seen as on the level of flag burning, protesting the government, as speaking negatively to the government? Dylan has a lot to say.
Dylan
I
has
can
a lot to
see it in his face.
I do, and this is where I will push back a lot. I will, again, preface by saying I support any individual's right to burn the American flag or to kneel during the national anthem. That being said, I think that is 1A and 1B, the two most disrespectful things an individual could do, because in my opinion, I don't see the American flag as a representation of my government. I see the American flag as a representation of my country. If you want to protest your government, grab a sign, go stand outside a government building. If you want to protest the government, send them emails, send mailers, put up a statue of Trump and Epstein in the National Mall. The American flag is supposed to be a symbol of America. It's not the United States government flag. Like there's the presidential flag with the presidential seal. Like there are flags for things. We have a flag for our country. We have a national anthem that represents our country. And I, as somebody who, has had family members that have fought in lots of wars and have passed and all of that kind of stuff, I see that as an insult to the sacrifice they made, because they stood up and they took an oath in front of that flag to not only defend the government, but to defend the country itself, to defend the Constitution and everything that we stand for, not a particular president or a particular administration. And I think when we try and make the argument that burning the American flag, and I'm not saying burning the American flag can't be a protest of the government, because at the end of the day, you're the individual, you get to decide how you're going to protest something. It's not fair for me to tell you, Spencer, that burning the American flag can't be a way of protesting the government, because if you want to protest the government and then you decide to burn the flag, in Spencer's brain, that's the logic. But to say that it only symbolizes that, I think, is lowering the value and the symbolism behind it in all that our country has stood for and been through. And I mean, just I agree with the point, you ban flag burning, it's a slippery slope. That's the government saying we don't like this kind of free speech, so we're going to ban it, and then, it could snowball. I'm not saying that, but
I have a feeling that if flag burning is banned, it will almost immediately snowball.
Yeah.
But let's hope we don't get there.
It could. Just in life in general, I try not to say things will happen, because I'm going to get struck. For all I know, I'm getting struck by lightning when I walk outside in an hour. So,
or getting attacked by those crows.
Yes, getting attacked by crows. Who knows?
Just be nice to them, they remember.
Did you see how many of them there were?
Did you see all the poop?
No.
I was just busy. They were calling. I thought I was going to die. There were so many of them.
Feed them and smile at them.
How many of them will you feed? They were covering the trees.
Bring 5 loaves of bread.
All right, I'll do that next time.
That's no.
Backpack full of...
The squirrels will attack me, but okay.
Don't feed them rice. It's bad for them.
Really? To go back to the... Okay. If we can circle back, I think we're going to disagree on flag burning. That's completely valid. I understand the image of it, especially with family because you have family that served. That's fair enough. But I think the larger point is that nations should not, in my view, in an anti-fascist view for the sake of the episode in the definition, nations should not inherently come before individual. I guess my point is that there's limits to patriotism. And there's a difference between patriotism and what's being defined in the definition we just looked at of fascism. Because the first thing you said in regards to the definition is that just sounded like patriotism. I think there's a distinction.
The part about putting the nation above the individual, I said, yeah. I mean, I would kind of define that as patriotism.
Sure, but do you see the difference between the extreme?
I mean, yeah, I see. When you get to the extreme end, yes, I 100% see how that falls into it. I think the issue we're facing then is that there's been a degradation of, where that line goes from patriotism to fascism.
Sure.
I feel like that's being lowered.
Okay, that's fair. Is there anything else in the definition that concerns you that you don't think it applies to Trump?
I don't think we have a government headed by a dictatorial leader.
Okay, so clear to establish that dictatorial is not inherently dictator.
I'm gonna click on the hyperlink to dictatorial.
Okay, because I would assume that it means having dictator-like elements.
Of, relating to, or benefiting a dictator is definition A. Definition B is ruled by a dictator.
All right, for the sake of this conversation, I'm not calling Trump a dictator. I'm saying that he has dictator tendencies. For the sake of the conversation, can dictatorial mean that? Dictator tendencies. Yeah, fair?
For the sake of this conversation, yeah.
Okay. My view of this is that the consistent bypassing of Congress for anything from the creation of things like Doge to the Venezuela strikes to the Iran strikes. I say those two because I'm writing a paper about them right now. But any number of things that are supposed to go through Congress that have not gone through Congress would be dictatorial because it's inherently expanding the role of the executive at the detriment of the legislative. I think the ways in which he's been consistently fighting and ignoring rulings by courts, whether that be ICE in Chicago or SNAP or, again, any number of things, would be a breakdown of the judicial in benefit of the executive. And also, if we want to have a less legal argument, the imagery of Trump as, surrounded by gold, as building a ballroom, as having quote-unquote Great Gatsby parties, as, making business deals, Trump business deals with governments he's supposed to have relations with, or generating AI content with him wearing a crown. All of these things, in a imagery standpoint, I would say are dictatorial in nature.
Okay.
I gave you a laundry list.
Yes, and I started writing them down. So the Iran and Venezuela strikes, he's the commander-in-chief, and we're not going to war, so we don't need congressional...
Would you argue that he's doing those strikes because he doesn't want to declare war? Because, those things are warlike. You're supposed to have congressional approval for strikes
for wars. You're supposed to have...
So what would you
need
call...
congressional authority to go to war.
What would you call the situation in Venezuela right now?
Targeted strikes on drug boats.
Which is illegal, first of all. Second of all, the consistent, I would say, is bordering on war. I think that the way that he's not using war is very intentional for that exact purpose. And I think bypassing legislation is still illegal. It's not enough for me to say that just because it's not officially a war doesn't mean it's warlike. I think that he's not using the term war for the sake of bypassing Congress, which is still concerning.
That's what LBJ did. That's what...
Oh, I don't like LBJ either, to be clear.
George, I mean...
I don't think it's isolated to Trump. I just think it's, among the other things, a significant point.
I would disagree. You need congressional approval to declare war. He hasn't declared war, so I can acknowledge that there's a workaround.
Okay.
But there's a workaround.
Okay.
And that's the way it is. So if it was legislated in a way that the workaround could no longer happen and he needed congressional authority to do anything and then he was still doing it, I would concede that would be dictatorial, but He has a legal workaround, so I don't think you can call that dictatorial.
Okay.
The expansion of the executive, I mean, yes, that it, in face value, you like taking power away from the legislature is dictatorial, but I think you have to look at the scale. We've seen the executive like gain a lot of power and then lose a lot of power. Like it's a cycle our country observes that we've seen repeatedly. Like after Watergate, like you saw this massive prolonged decline in executive authority, and then 9/11 happens and you see this like increase again. And so I think there's to a certain extent a cyclical cycle of the trade-off between executive and legislative authority.
Okay.
I would concede though that if you were taking massive steps, especially constitutional authority from the legislature, that would definitely be a dictatorial behavior. Snap.
Because
Can I ask you would you specify a little bit more on Snap, because that's actually something I've read a little. I'm a little read up on.
Sure.
So
yeah, so I'm not going to claim to be super read up on it, but from my understanding, during the shutdown that just ended, there was money that was already appropriated to SNAP benefits that were not going through, that were shut down by Trump. I don't know the specifics on if it was Trump or the administration or whatever, but in effect shut down by Trump. And certain courts said that that was illicit and that they needed to go through, and eventually pushed its way up to the courts, I believe very quickly, which I don't know if that's normal or not, but it very quickly went up to the Supreme Court, at which point they voted in his favor. We can talk about the split of the court later, but that situation where he was going against the courts, he's also gone against courts in related to some ICE cases. So SNAP is one example.
So
interestingly, it was Biden's Supreme Court nominee who sided with Trump.
That's fine. Yeah,
That was I want to say that's like
Brown,
yeah.
Jackson.
That was interesting.
Oh, did she?
Me.
I actually didn't see that.
She did.
Fair enough. Okay.
I'm going to shout this podcast out. It's called Unbiased Politics. It's with Jordan. I think her last name is Berman. It's like a 50-minute episode. She does one Monday and does one Thursday. In terms of news, that's where I get like 90% of my news from now. She is, I will give her credit, genuinely the most unbiased journalist I have ever listened to in my entire life. I think she does an absolutely phenomenal, incredible job of delivering the news. And it's all like politics and what's going on in the world.
Noted.
And she hits on this a lot. So I'm going to credit Jordan as my source of information for all of this.
I'm ready to learn.
What you're talking about is there's something called the contingency fund.
Yes.
So SNAP benefit, there's regular SNAP benefits that go to SNAP people or people that are on SNAP every month. There's a contingency fund. The contingency fund is not designed for, hey, SNAP benefits run out, so we have this backstop pot of money.
Okay.
Because there's about $8 billion that gets sent out in SNAP every month.
Mm-hmm.
The contingency fund has somewhere between $4 and $5 billion in it.
Gotcha.
The purpose of the contingency fund is to be present for natural disasters.
Okay.
So, like, Katrina is a great example. Katrina happened. They've got $5 billion roughly sitting there that can go to aid extra individuals to help them cover food costs in times of crisis.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, like, that's the purpose of the contingency fund. And it was the view of the administration that, hey, this is what this purpose is for. Running out of money is not a national emergency.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we're not going to spend it. I forget which federal district court. It was in the First Circuit. So some district court in the First Circuit, appellate circuit. So the judge basically said, like, hey, you have to either partially fund SNAP benefits using the contingency fund, or you had to use all, or you had to completely fund SNAP using some other source of money.
Interesting. Okay.
And then he said you had to do this by Wednesday. And this ruling came out on like a Monday or something. So
that's why it was sped up.
The administration had a couple days turnaround to do this.
All right.
Which I think for something like SNAP, because then when you look at the process of there has to be money, and then the money has to go to the EBIT card. Like, there's this quasi-private entity in the middle that actually runs the SNAP cards and distributes the benefits.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of questioning of, do they even have the ability to accurately calculate what partial benefits would look like?
Okay, I gotcha.
They didn't have enough time there. And then my personal opinion, I feel like that's a little legislative-y of saying you have to.
No,
I'm
I
not
get
a
what you're
legal
saying.
expert, but
Yeah.
I feel like saying like, hey, look, you have to spend this money and you have to do it in one of two ways. I don't feel like that's a very traditionally judicial-esque thing. I don't want to debate that because I feel like that's a big rabbit hole that
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
not educated to go down on. And so then that ruling gets appealed to, so this is where it gets a little complicated. That ruling gets appealed to the First Circuit Court. And the First Circuit Court says, hey, we'll review the decision. Well, then the government asks the district court again, hey, district court, while the appellate court is reviewing the merits of this case, can you place a stay on this so we don't have to fund anything?
Mm.
And then, like, the district court says one thing. I think the district court said no. And so then they go to the appellate court, and I think then the appellate court, I forget what the appellate court said, but then it gets up to the Supreme Court.
I understand, yeah.
And Brown, how do you say her first? Is it
Ketanji.
Ketanji, thank you. So Ketanji Brown Jackson.
I was not aware of this. This is
I
interesting.
didn't know
Okay.
this. But every Supreme Court justice has an appellate district they oversee.
Ah.
Ketanji Brown Jackson oversees quotation marks, the first district. So when these emergency appeals get sent up to the Supreme Court,
Okay, I got you.
the justice has one of two options. They can they have the authority to either outright like grant the emergency thing.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't like a decision on the merits of the case, but like
Yeah.
these types of stay orders, or they can refer it to the full
court.
Supreme Court for decision.
All right, I'm getting educated today.
She made the decision of, hey, I'm just going to grant the pause,
This, yeah.
saying that like you don't have to carry out the district court's ruling while that ruling is under review by the appellate court.
All right.
So
I was wrong. And that, no, that's fair. That's fair.
But here's the thing. I think the Trump administration did run past that Wednesday deadline that they were given. I think it was tight. I think that whole situation was a bit of a cluster because it was a very short time window and there were a lot of different things going on in the courts. I think it was just a hot mess all around, and I'm glad the government's open and people can get their SNAP benefits. And now I'm glad I got to share, something I learned from this podcast, which is something
awesome.
I've been waiting to do for a while. And I'm really interested to see like what other justices, like what appellate courts they oversee.
Yeah, that's super
I'm gonna have to
interesting.
Google
I
that
didn't
at
know
some
about
point. So I know that
All right.
we kind of got off topic.
No,
but
that's okay. I was gonna say, barring further research on my end, I concede the point on Snap. I was not aware. I'll point to the hole in echo chambery news. Fair enough.
But so if nothing else, I got that small win today.
Yeah. Hey, to be fair though, just to my own personal defense, because I do generally try to read news on both sides, I didn't see any of that information coming from the right either. I was just seeing a battle over whether or not Snap should exist. So that's my bad, but I'm glad to be educated.
I don't watch the news at all, period.
Sure.
Anymore, short of some like major breaking event happening or election or whatever. Which it pains me to say this, but I am a big fan.
Steve Kornacki.
Oh, not even that.
No.
I'm going to get to Steve in a second. I grew up watching elections on like election night on CNN.
Yeah.
Because I just liked the graphics of the big
They're
board.
so much better.
Better than Fox.
Yeah.
I'm
Fox
sorry,
graphics in general kind of just suck.
I didn't like it compared to like the graphics on the screen.
Yeah.
And now I've been a Steve Kornacki guy for a while.
I'm a big Steve Kornacki
I'm a
kinda girl.
nerd.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can see the nerd in him. Plus, my first name is Steven and his first name is Steven. So I feel like we connect on
There you go.
that level.
Yeah.
But I will but now like I have the split screen thing, so I usually have Steve Kornacki on one screen and then Fox on the other. But like I don't really even read news a whole lot either. Like the podcast, the Unbiased Politics, is where I get a lot of my news from. And she went to law school and was a lawyer for a while, and so she loves to like get really into the nitty gritty of like the legality and the cases related. Like she did a ton of episodes on ICE and the
Gotcha,
legality
okay.
and everything. So if you want to
Yeah,
like
yeah,
a
I'll
great
cut
reference,
for sure.
go back to like her October episodes. Um,
All right, I will pause this really quick. Our guest is here.
oh, awesome.
Hello.
Also, I think it's kind of funny. Permission to change the title of this episode to "Oops, All Antifa."
Yeah.
I think that'd be fun.
I think that's funny.
Cool.
So we ended up talking about Antifa the entire time.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you. How do I sound?
You sound great. Can you all hear him?
I can
Yes,
hear
sir.
him. Yeah.
All right, you are our first official guest on the podcast. You want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Hey. Who's
Hi there.
Everyone? Hello there.
How's it
Hi,
going?
Nice to meet you. Good. I've listened to a couple of the early episodes.
Oh,
and,
nice.
Y'all are delightful.
Thank you.
Why, thank you.
Yeah, he's a podcast expert. He got access to our unreleased,
That's right.
our hot takes.
Hello.
Hey there. Hello. Nice to meet you.
So, it would have been fascinating if you would have heard some of the wild directions this debate has gone so far today.
So many directions.
So, what do you have to say about Antifa? And then I guess I will open it up to you can ask them questions. They can ask you questions.
Okay. Well, around 2016, I was one of the early adopters of this Trump MAGA thing. Feels like resurgent fascism to me, but I was admittedly not an expert. There were a few things, and I'd be happy to talk about what first kind of alerted me, but I thought it was interesting that there was. So long story short, eventually about 2 years ago, I brought a project with my spouse, Ruth Vaca Lopez, frequent creative partner, called the Anti-Fascist Hall of Fame to The Nation magazine, one of the oldest and most illustrious progressive magazines. And they got behind it. They didn't have money to do it, but they said, they have a huge audience, and with their name on it, if I could go and find the funding, they'd be happy to help release it and promote it. So it was like better than nothing. So it became the nation's Anti-Fascist Hall of Fame. And there were kind of two things involved there. One, I thought it made sense to look at the people who originally fought fascism and try to find who were the most impactful, who made it turn in the directions that ultimately resulted in fascism being defeated in 1945. And I thought if we could hear their stories, maybe we could all learn lessons from them. So whether or not I was right in my assessment that Trump and MAGA represented a modern resurgence of, if not fascist, then at least fascish.
Fasci.
Yeah. It's like, it's not fascist. I mean, it might be fascish.
I like
so, if it's not, but even if I was wrong, I felt like we could still learn lessons from these people who beat what most considered, at least until recently, some of the ultimate villains of the modern age, right? And how did they do it, and who were they? Turns out that's actually really a lot trickier, which I'd be happy to go into. How we ultimately succeeded there, and if you could really call out a top 10 list, let's say, of the people who really did this, but that was sort of that was my journey. And by the way, I failed to find funding for this, but after the election last year, I went back to the Nation and I said, I think people are going to be really interested in this subject. If you guys can find some cash so we could actually do this. And they said that it was their assessment, and I take that to mean sort of the general buzz on the left, that this rush to call it fascism, in particular in the 2024 election, had resulted in Donald Trump's successful election. That was where they were going at that time. So the feeling was, we want to pull back, be more moderate, take a wait and see approach. So that project never happened. But that's my backstory on kind of why I'm talking to you about the subject. I guess I would mostly say that here's what I find interesting. There's a trap. It turns out that it's one of the oldest debates, um, how you define fascism. What counts as fascism and what doesn't, other than, Mussolini's Italy and Hitler's Germany. Everything else seems to be sort of up for debate. And it turns out that goes all the way back to, there's an article from like 1943 written by George Orwell. In fact, I brought a quote. Of course, we all know Orwell, 1984 fame and so forth. And he essentially said, trying to find it for us, sorry. But what he said was that even at the time, now, mind you, he was writing from a house that would be brought to rubble by fascist bombs in only a matter of weeks, and his nation is at war with actual fascists that no one disagrees is fascism, and even he was saying that essentially it was the most overused term by that time, that everyone wanted to apply it to their enemies, that there was no common agreement about what it actually meant. And he said, except for the relatively small number of fascist sympathizers, almost any English person would accept bully as a synonym for fascist. That is about as near to a definition as this much abused word has come. And he added, even the people who recklessly fling the word fascist in every direction attach at any rate an emotional significance to it. By fascism, they mean, roughly speaking, something cruel, unscrupulous, arrogant, obscurantist, anti-liberal democracy, and anti-working class. I thought that was really interesting. But so it goes all the way back to Orwell, and by the time I was 9 years old, fascism had continued to be such an overused term against one's enemies that a guy named Mike Godwin, you may know, came up with something called Godwin's Law for the internet age. And the idea was that if at any point in an argument somebody brought the Nazis or the Holocaust into that argument, they were said to immediately forfeit the argument because it was so common. But I would point out that a couple of years ago, I think it was at this point 5 years ago, Mike Godwin came forward with an article in which he said he was putting it back on the table. It was now acceptable to call fascist again, and Trump and MAGA were the reason.
Wow.
So I could go on endlessly on this subject, but is that a good place to pause? What do we want to talk about here?
Who would like to comment first?
Why'd you point at me, Dylan?
Because you've been sitting over there smiley like you've had things to say.
No, I was just gonna say that I think we agreed on a lot of it. Starting, I guess, backwards to give Dylan a fair shot at this. Oh, for context, I guess we should introduce ourselves also.
Yeah, I was gonna say, did you explain to him who each of you are?
I don't think we did. So I'm Anushka Pandey. I'm the college Democrats president. And yeah, if you want,
don't have to turn. I mean,
yeah, when we go over to Dylan, you'll.
Dylan is the president of the College Communist Party.
College Republicans.
That's hilarious. I appreciate you not calling me the communist. For the sake of Dylan's argument, I think we definitely agreed that it's an overused word, which is why a fair amount of our discussion at least attempted to look at the definition and go piece by piece. Definitely interesting that it's kind of been this resurgence, either from you who's studied this, or I'm already blanking on his name, but the person that you mentioned, I hadn't heard of that.
Mike Godwin.
Mike Godwin. I haven't heard of the Godwin, the test. But I think it's interesting and coincidental, obviously from my perspective, that it's something that's kind of re-entered the collective vocabulary. I don't think that's an accident at all. And as a general statement, agree with, a lot of what you said, where there's shades and, a lot of questions to whether or not this is actually the correct word to use, whether it can be related to the Mussolinis and the Hitlers in any way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think what comes up more often than whether it's accurate or not is whether it's helpful, especially among the left.
Yeah.
Is it helpful to apply it? And that one I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you that. I don't know that I had realized the connection people were drawing between just the use of the word fascism widely and the election of Trump? Is that a purely reactive thing, or what was the explanation there?
You know how it was right after that election. I mean, I think there was a general feeling on the left, and I think it was correct, that we had lost, possibly for, one of the biggest fights, one of the most important of all time, and that there were
Mm-hmm.
going to be great consequences. So I think there was a lot of, um, I don't think anyone was feeling like being bold.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
right? We
Yeah, I would
certainly
agree with
didn't
that.
see, yeah. And we're still only just now starting to see a certain amount of the boldness that we saw in 2017 start returning, in Trump too.
Yeah,
So,
and again, seeing the, oh, we lost the fight again. Maybe we need to stop being bold. I mean, yeah,
yeah. So it's like, we may have just lost for all time. So let's just, let's stop calling names. Let's kind
sure.
of, reassess. But I see my argument was that if this is pulling, generally speaking, from the fascist playbook, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
not talking about a Holocaust or a world war, because
Sure.
we have to remember that under Mussolini, this started in 1922 and continued for more than 2 decades. Under the Nazis, there was an entire period in which, like right through, I believe, 1936, with a really great Olympic Games, a lot of the world was willing to give a benefit of the doubt, and maybe there's some good and some bad here.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's not, I have a lot of people who will say, like, I don't see us doing a genocide or
Mm.
bringing the world to war. And I'm like, yeah, but that was just the ending.
Oh,
It
sure.
still sucked
Yeah.
to live under that if you were a democracy loving, freedom loving, even humanity loving people.
Yeah.
And so my question was, if this matches the playbook, if we recognize that this is fascism, could we learn some things from the anti-fascists about what they did right and who they were and how they ultimately, at long last succeeded? So I guess that would be my argument, but
Yeah,
I'll
fair
stop
enough. I think it's super interesting. I'll let Dylan kind of take over and see what he has to say that's maybe, more contradictory.
there.
Um, I mean, I do definitely agree with the notion of trying to learn from, the anti-fascists of the past that were around, in the 30s and 40s and maybe even like the 20s. I don't know how far back Mussolini's whole thing went. And you know, when we forget history, we're doomed to repeat it. So I do 100%, see truth and to wanting to try and learn how we can prevent, the next. And I say Mussolini or Hitler, not even like the whole genocide thing, but just the dictatorialness of them. I guess I would just push back on the notion that, we really needed to be worried about Trump being a dictator. Um, I understand that a lot of individuals aren't fans of his, and it's very easy to just yell fascist and yell fascism. And at least from, the exercise Anushka and I went through, like sitting here and piecemealing kind of through the dictionary definition of it, I personally don't see much validity in, saying that Trump or the MAGA movement is like bringing about fascism or the return of a fascist. But again, that's kind of my perspective.
The point of the episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, there's a few things that a number of people have tried to define, but the cult of personality was what struck me, and some of the aspects of that cult of personality. So it's essentially, you've got someone who has authoritarian tendencies, but they're a demagogue in a certain way that seems to strike a chord with enough of the population. And one of the first things that made me start looking at this was in early 2016. It was the rallies, which you don't have to be a fascist to be able to hold successful rallies, but there was a tendency of Trump to tip his hat towards wouldn't it be nice if somebody just punched that protester in the face kind of vibe? Back in the day, we used to take them out in the streets, and you know what I'm saying? And then inevitably, violence would happen. Somebody would do that. And that in the with the rise of Mussolini's fascism in Italy, that was like a hallmark of it is that there would be the people with the guns, as Trump would say, but the most violent who had been outsiders in the community up until then. Many of them were sort of PTSD suffering World War I vets and things like that. But it was the people who were willing to do violence on the streets. And, they were very happy to see a leader who would say, wouldn't it be great if you guys went to that union rally and while they're giving speeches, just kind of gave them hell. And of course, as that happens over and over, you have two things happen. One is then the left has to get violent to counter the fascist violence. And then the fascists can rightly say, look at this violence that the left has been doing in XYZ examples. So it's a trap. And the other thing that happens is people just sort of ordinary people who just want to live their lives and be happy and be free of getting pounded in the head by random thugs sort of stop showing up and stop participating in democracy. So that was a first one. And I mean, I could read you a list that's been popular, which is, and I'm sure you guys went through this, but a guy named Umberto Eco he was an Italian who grew up as a fascist youth, under Mussolini. He actually won an award for giving the best pro-fascist speech when he was a kid in school.
Huh.
And then
That's
and then
that's
one
an award.
and then one day in 1945, Italy is what's the word? Uh, Saved by the Allies, and suddenly all these American troops are marching into his little town, and people are cheering, and he wasn't even aware anyone in his town was anti-fascist. So this is the first time he's aware that anyone doesn't like fascism or Mussolini, and it was that he actually remembers it was black American troops who came in and gave him bubble gum and baseball cards, and he was like, what is this thing that isn't fascism that I'm now experiencing, and so we went on this lifelong kind of journey. And around the mid 90s, it was the same thing we're discussing now. There was Mussolini's so the fascist party under a new name was sort of resurrected in Italy, and it was starting to make inroads electorally again. And they actually ran Mussolini's granddaughter for mayor of Rome. And he was just seeing signs. But when he would say, this party is fascist, they would say, you're crazy. Only a crazy person would say that. And he's like, there must be some way to define this. And he ended up coming up with this theory that a lot of people who are into calling fascism now will point to. It's called fascism or eternal fascism. And it has 14 typical features. Now, I'm not saying these are proven in science. If they were, we wouldn't even have to have a debate. But he lists the cult of tradition, the rejection of modernism, the cult of action for action's sake, disagreement is treason, fear of difference, appeal to social frustration with a plot. The enemy is both strong and weak. By a continuing shifting of rhetorical focus, the enemies are at the same time too strong and too weak, which really resonates with me in terms of sort of the rhetoric out of the White House. But pacifism is trafficking with the enemy, contempt for the weak, everyone educated to become a hero, machismo and weaponry, selective populism, and a tendency towards newspeak. And the argument is that you don't have to check off all the boxes, that like fascism will reinvent itself in the culture that it emerges in, but that it will have many of these traits. And of course, it will have an authoritarian bully at its head. So again, we're never going to agree. But I think if it's not fascist, I think many people would at least agree that it's fascish, certainly closer than we've ever gotten or wanted to get in the country. But what do you think?
I mean, I guess first to circle back to your initial point you were making on kind of that violence aspect or some of those things. What first popped into my mind was like the political violence taking place in the like early 1900s,
Hmm.
like at the height of like the political machine and everything, where you had lots of like party bosses intimidating um, to get their way, or like taking somebody out in the street and beating them up before a convention or whatever. And I don't know if we would call the teens in the 20s necessarily a period where we had a very fascist or fascish or fascesque or whatever um, type of government. I know that's like
Right.
you elaborated a lot more on your point there than I am. Um, to the
So you're saying like, yeah, you can point to this sign and it's kind of like fascist. You can point to that sign and it's kind of like fascist. But then just because that sign is there doesn't mean this thing is fascist. Am I
well,
a
I
little
would
bit?
say you would call something that's happening now fascist, but then we never called something happening in the past fascist that's almost identical. And I don't think anybody's actively trying to start calling that type of behavior back then fascist, so I don't think it'd be fair to then try and do that now.
Okay. Yeah.
Is I guess what I'm trying to say about that.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
to the 14 point checklist, the cult of tradition, rejection of rationalism.
Here's a quote that I think is better than the list itself from him. It said fascism was philosophically out of joint. Like it never returned the same way twice, even in the classic age. But emotionally, it was firmly fastened to some archetypal foundations. And he had kind of an aha moment. And he was like, the notion of fascism is not unlike Wittgenstein's notion of a game. A game can be either competitive or not. It can require some special skill or none. It can or cannot involve money. Games are different activities that display only some family resemblance, he says. Even though political regimes can be overthrown and ideologies can be criticized and disowned, behind a regime and its ideology, there is always a way of thinking and feeling, a group of cultural habits, of obscure instincts and unfathomable drives. And that's where his 14 instincts, cultural habits, and unfathomable drives that are sort of similar across fascist regimes.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, looking at this list, for I guess for the sake of you know argument, like fear of social or appeal to social frustration, like I don't know if that would be an accurate point. I feel like that, at least in my lifetime, has been a political tactic used by every major political candidate, at least for president. Like I think part of the inherent democratic process is recognizing there is some frustration, appealing to it, and saying, "Hey, I'm going to be the person that's going to help fix this frustration we as a society, whether that's a nation, a state, a city, whatever, is feeling
mm,
um, as a, you know, obviously a mechanism for getting elected, but then hopefully something that's acted upon to try and alleviate whatever frustration the, you know, whatever electorate you're looking at is feeling." I would think that would be less of appealing to a just frustration,
mm,
and you would have to look at what is the frustration they're feeling. If it's, oh hey, I'm just inflation, like just the first thing that comes to mind. Inflation sucks. Like I don't see that as a problem. If it's, oh hey, we hate this, whatever characteristic of people, like that's a problem. Both I think would fall under the umbrella of some frustration that's being felt. So I would think with something like that, you would maybe need a little bit more, I don't know, nuance to it.
mm.
Um,
Yeah.
I think another one maybe that's interesting would be um, pacifism is trafficking with the enemy. What in your mind, and maybe I'm interpreting this incorrectly. So like would you elaborate on what that means? Cuz I feel like I have a definition of it, but I don't know if it's the accurate one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing a quote next to this in that I took down that Echo apparently said on this. For fascism, there is no struggle for life, but rather life is lived for struggle. And this was a big idea in Germany apparently, that like it was never really about winning battles against the left or the Jews or wars. It was about the struggle itself. That like that a leader in particular, but then its movement gains all of its sort of strength and energy from that struggle, not necessarily from achieving its goal. I'm not saying that resonates strongly.
I mean, I okay, that I think that's not I interpreted it as being a bystander is I say being a bystander, but being a bystander to whatever situation, or not being involved in whatever situation or problem is, like quote unquote, like I don't want to say trafficking
If
with
you're
the
not with
enemy.
us, you're with them.
Yeah, but then I
That's
don't want
how-
to sound like I'm quoting Anakin Skywalker from Star Wars either.
That's just how I interpret it, and I haven't seen Star Wars, so
Well, that's what would pop into my head. But the mindset of, if you're a bystander to an issue or a problem and you're not doing anything to, help advocate for a solution, then you are a part of the problem, or you're complacent in it, is how I read that, which I read that very differently than how you.
It's like the silence is
interpreted that.
violence movement.
I have not heard
Yeah.
that one.
You haven't seen that
Yeah,
one?
and I'm
I haven't
seeing
heard that one.
That was all over the place back in 2016. Silence is violence. You remember that, don't you, Ray?
silence is violence. Yeah, what do we make of that?
You have to remember that we were like 11 in 2016.
Yeah.
I
These
was
are
in,
these
I
are
was in
children.
fifth grade.
Yeah.
I
So-
googled this pacifism is trafficking with the enemy line, by the way, and some takes align with what you're saying. So it's like the idea is rooted in the fascist belief that strength is proven through struggle and that weakness is unacceptable. You'll never save your democracy by being weak. Pacifism, therefore, is seen as a weakness and a betrayal of the national or ideological cause. So I do think it is. If you're not willing to fight for right the fascist cause in whatever new form it takes, then you're seen as the enemy. It's yes, neutrality is not acceptable, right? I mean, do we see any echoes of that now? But I guess you could argue on both sides, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that one could be argued on both sides.
Yeah, and I don't know. Like, I think this is me not trying to be like a warmonger or everything, because that's not our place. But I think there is some value to the statement, and I guess this kind of ties into that. Kind of ties into silence is violence or pacifism kills or whatever. But like, I feel that there's a certain responsibility that, as the historically most, the number one nation in the world, or we're America. I don't want to like debate if where our current standing is, but we have an added responsibility to fight against injustice or problems where we see it. In complacency, I think is a bit of a cop out, and being accepting whatever wrong is taking place, like to for it to continue to be perpetuated.
That's
Now,
interesting.
can I
I
throw
took
a
a much.
thought? Sorry.
No, I was
I've
just gonna say I
dominated the
took a much
conversation.
more domestic view of it, but go ahead and say what you were gonna.
Well, so I started out by kind of pointing out that this is like quicksand, right? This has
Yeah.
been debated since Orwell in 1943, and so yeah, it goes like this every single time. Well, here are the points of don't you see the parallels? what is it? The past doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
I
Yeah.
have heard that, yeah.
And it's like, no, this is completely different, and you're making it. So I think again, I think it's a weird trap to get into, that one that you'll never win. Here's what I find interesting. I sort of cataloged the chronology of who started breaking Godwin's law, and when they ever sort of the dam broke on MAGA is fascism. And so if I could kind of give you a quick,
Please.
all right. So among the early adopters like myself around 2016, you had historians at like USC's Steve Ross, U Maryland's Jeffrey Herf, Council on Foreign Relations Max Boot, a few prominent leftist activist writers, Washington Post Carl Bernstein of Woodward and Bernstein fame, Robert Kagan, and Slate's Jamel Bowie. So pretty fringe still. Like, I mean, there's semi-prominent names, but it wasn't anybody really sticking their necks out. During the first term, a few more prominent people did, depending on how you see them, did sort of step forward and were willing to at least warn that this could be fascism. There was former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, um, London's Mayor Sadiq Khan, the quote unquote squad members, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Columbia's Sherry Berman, Yale's Timothy Snyder and Jason Stanley, MIT's Darren, and I don't actually know how to pronounce his last name, Asamoglu, and then the Financial Times' Patrick Cockburn. Now, after the insurrection, or whatever Donald's going to make us call it from now on, January 6th, there was you well, okay, so I mean, but you start to see people like David Korn, NYU's Ruth Ben-Ghiat, Washington Post's Michael Gerson, Dana Milbank, New Yorker's Adam Gropnik. So it's like it becomes more efficient, more prominent. And I just want to point out that we forget, like memory is being erased. But during the election of 2024, which was not that long ago, um, there was Donald's former chief of staff, a Marine, John Kelly. He had said that Trump fits into the general definition of fascist. The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the military, General Mark Milley, said Donald was fascist to the core. And the president of the United States at the time, Joe Biden, called him semi-fascist. And the candidate of the other major party, Kamala Harris, um, was asked, "Do you think he's fascist?" And she said, "I think he is." In fact, 47. So what was it? There was a poll conducted, an ABC News poll um, conducted at the time that said 44% of Americans felt Trump was fascist. But of course, he wins an election. If 100 million Americans are backing him, we can't have 100 million Americans that are fascists. So poof, all of that growth in this phenomenon suddenly disappears and is now fringe once again. Thoughts?
I think that's very interesting because my first point, I would discredit both Joe not and Kamala, and not I'm only me, so I can't know what anybody else, what knowledge any other human possesses, right? I guess without like asking them, and I've never got to ask Joe or Kamala, can you define fascism for me? But I feel that it's a very plausible argument to make that they would say he's a fascist to help Joe's reelection, and then it turned into Kamala's reelection.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with something like that, you have to invalidate them saying it. I would invalidate 90% of the individuals you said because of how staunch they are in being a Democrat and a liberal and their distaste for Trump in general. I think it's hard. I would think it would be hard for those individuals to be objective in their reasoning. Somebody like, the former chief of staff or Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, like, I don't have a refutation to individuals like that. I guess the other general refutation I would make is, both Anushka and I sat here and, like, we tried to define fascism before reading the actual definition. I think it's interesting that while we both had, I think, a very solid definition of what we thought it was. Both of our definitions were different, and neither of them was the dictionary definition. And this is me not trying to, like, just play the other side and invalidate every single person you've said. I'm getting the from...
Yeah.
But
you did say the only valid ones were the Republicans, is all I'm going to point out.
Well, yeah, because in something... Here's the thing. I think that points to the larger problem that I think we've hammered on before, but it's hard for people in politics to be impartial these days. It's been hard for a long time.
Yeah, but some of those people were journalists.
I think we have very few journalists on either side that are impartial these days.
Did you not mention one of the Watergate journalists?
Yeah. Bernstein.
Yeah. And here's the thing.
I met him. It was great.
I will give him credit. I think he
Very biased against Nixon.
is
Right, but excellent. Like, I know you're making a joke,
Yeah,
but I
yeah,
think
yeah.
it's an excellent point, because just because you have bias doesn't mean that your point is inaccurate.
I agree, but that's different. Like with the Watergate scandal, like that's reporting a factual event that happened. Giving your opinion on if an individual is a fascist, when we established earlier in this podcast that it's very hard to define fascism, and an individual's definition of fascism is almost always not the textbook dictionary definition of fascism. I think that allows bias to creep in a lot, furthering the fact that you are then belonging to the party opposite of the individual you're calling a fascist, and seeing as how if you can perpetuate that notion enough, maybe that can hurt their electoral chances. Here's the thing. For all I know, every single one of these people was staring at the Merriam-Webster definition of fascism when they were making their statements. I'm not them, and I wasn't there when they said it, so I can't say that wasn't a possibility. I just see them letting their own biases, again, most of these individuals, I see them allowing their own biases to enter the mix and affect their objective reasoning as a disqualification for if they can objectively speak on if an individual is a fascist. Is the argument I would make.
I have just 2 points on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can tell you're getting a little fired up over here.
Yeah, just a little bit. Just because, I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
as much as let me move this a little bit. As much as I, take pride in my debate skills, I don't think I'm going to be able to convince you in this conversation. And so just the only thing that I'd mention is, one, the point that was being made originally, which is that this is no longer a fringe thing. It's not random crazy people calling somebody a fascist because they don't like him. It's prominent politicians. Like, just the example is, nobody in 2012 was calling Romney a fascist.
Correct. And I will pause that and say, look at any autocracy or dictatorship ever. Like, the majority of the people there, like to say that it's become a mainstream thing, so therefore it has to be true. The mainstream opinion of Putin in Russia is that he's a great guy, so
but
does that have to be true? Like,
right, but at that same point,
I guess what I'm trying to illustrate is sometimes the fringe can be right, but then sometimes
no, sure, yeah. No, I was just clarifying the point that, like, it's one thing to say they're just calling him fascist because they disagree with him, and another to recognize that it's now a mainstream opinion that's being had. Not that makes it automatically correct, but it's significant. In the same way that just because people oppose Putin in Russia doesn't mean that them calling him a dictator is inherently incorrect. I think that just needs to be recognized. The other point that I was going to make is one that I'm completely blanking on now. Darn. It was going to be so good too, trust me. No, but I think that part is significant. That, like, it's not something that just, and we mentioned this earlier, but it's not something that just appears into the vocabulary for fun, right? I think in the same way that it's not fair to call Bernie Sanders a communist, it maybe isn't fair to call Trump a fascist. However, there's a reason that those words are being brought in.
And I think that you can make an argument that there are reasons to call Bernie a communist.
Yeah, that's what I'm,
100%.
that's what I'm agreeing with
and
you.
I guess what I would, my counter to that would be that, yes, we weren't calling Romney a fascist in 2012. We weren't calling Obama a communist in 2012.
I remembered my second point once you're done.
I think 2012 versus now, we've become a lot more divided and have moved towards further ends of each, side of the political spectrum, which contain communism and fascism. So
Ooh.
that's why we enter those words more. But I would also make the argument that as a society, we have just become meaner and have,
That's a cop
at
out.
least with politics, we have become more okay being mean to the other side.
You think we're meaner than like the Red Scare McCarthyism? I think that's a cop out.
No, compared to 2012.
Oh, sure, but
Compared
I'm saying that like
I know, but 2012 was a time period you brought up, so that's what I'm comparing to.
yeah.
We've become meaner at least since 2012, and with the increase in venomous discourse, people are going to start throwing around heavier.
right, but 2012 was also
things.
people saying that Obama wasn't an American citizen. Like people were plenty mean. Anyway, the other point I was going to bring up, valid critique, right? The other point I was going to bring up is that and I understand why you're doing this on your end, but I don't think it's fair to draw a line and say this side is fascist and this side is not fascist, right? It's a spectrum. And so that's why I think also the importance of one, the non-fringe political thought that was being mentioned, but also the spectrum of people that are recognizing tendencies is really significant. Because even if you don't agree with 100% of the definition, there's a lot there. It's fascist tendencies more so than necessarily fascist or not fascist.
Okay,
Can I run
guess
with the spectrum idea when you're done answering? When you're done responding? to
Okay,
that?
thank you. Yeah, sorry. I guess I was going to hammer 2 points then. The problem is we have not been saying Trump has fascist tendencies. We've been saying Trump is a fascist.
I disagree.
I think that is what's being perpetuated. Let me rephrase. Because I have heard people saying Trump has fascist tendencies, but I think the narrative that's being perpetuated is that Trump is a fascist, not that he has fascist tendencies. The other thing, and I guess maybe this is where we disagree philosophically, I don't know if I see fascism necessarily as a spectrum. I think you're either a fascist or you're not. I see it as less of a spectrum and more of something where you are or are not, and you can have maybe fascist tendencies, but having fascist tendencies is different than being a fascist. And there comes a point in time where you either are or you're not. And I don't think Trump is a fascist, and I think when we promote that as a narrative that's incorrect is I guess what I'm trying to say, and that I view it as less of this gradual spectrum.
So I mentioned, if 100 million Americans are backing this person, 100 million Americans can't be fascist, so this is not fascism. There's sort of that general argument, right? And I think there's an overemphasis. Y'all were talking about it right here, where you tend to look at the leader. But the fascist leader is not the only component of fascism. There's also sort of the fascist movement itself.
Yeah.
And then the rest of society gets kind of caught up in it. At some point, they gain political power using a democratic means and then never sort of give it up and slowly dismantle the ability to ever get out of power. But there was a young media and society theorist. He was actually like a musicologist named Theodor Adorno. He happened to be Jewish, but he was part of this
I know
group.
Adorno. I took a class
You know
on this.
Adorno?
Yes.
So he was part of the Frankfurt School, and they were intellectuals and in some cases media theorists, and they were the first ones to take note when the Nazi Party ran and got 3% of the vote, which I believe was it was 28, and they were like, well, let's study this. So they started doing surveys to figure out who was this 3% that was going for it, and that's so small, right? But the next time around, 1930, the amount of votes for the Nazi Party jumped to 18%, and they continued doing surveys. Then, in 1932, it jumped to 37%, which under European system allowed a coalition government in which they got the centrists to go along with them, and they essentially came into power. And then, Hitler became the chancellor the next year, and we were donezo. After that, it was all show elections. Like the Nazis got like 92% in the next election, 98%, and then 99% after that. So Adorno has it. They have their ability to teach. Their licenses taken. There was this attack on academia, like we're seeing now. Similar, may not be the same thing, but he realized he was going to no longer be able to publish papers. There were all these things he was not going to be able to proceed in his academic career in Germany anymore. So he got out. He was one of the lucky ones. And after the war, he goes back and he pulls all of that information about who, the polling data of the Frankfurt School and all this stuff. And he works with, I think it was USC, it might have been Berkeley, but he works with these data scientists, and they developed something called the F scale, the fascism scale. And the idea is they were trying to figure out what flips the switch of a society to get a significant amount of people behind a fascist leader, this rare, charismatic fascist leader that appears every so often. And what was that? And they kind of found that so they created this questionnaire. One of the strongest determinations as to whether you were likely to have your switch flipped by a fascist leader was whether you gave a 1 to 6 in terms of your agreement with the question. What our youth need most is strict discipline, rugged determination, and the will to work and fight for family and country.
Crap. I would put that as a 6.
That's you. You're a 6 on that one?
I mean, we had.
Yeah. I would probably put a 5 or a 6. So I guess that means
what our country needs most, more than laws and political programs, is a few courageous, tireless, devoted leaders in whom the people can put their faith.
Oh, wait, was that the second half of the quote?
That's another question.
I was about to say, whoa, if that was the second. Okay, so can you reread the second one again?
The second one is what our country needs most, more than laws and political programs, is a few courageous, tireless, devoted leaders in whom the people can put their faith. 1 to 6.
I'm going to say in a perfect world a 6, but we don't live in a perfect world because people do bad things, so I would put a 1 there.
It says our society.
What?
It says our society.
So then, yeah, a 1. A 1.
Sex crimes such as rape and attacks on children deserve more than mere imprisonment. Such criminals ought to be publicly whipped. Agree. 1
I'm
6.
assuming 1 is disagree. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
yeah. I'd probably be
I would go
I'd be
2.
a 3,
2 or 3
probably.
Yeah.
There are 2 kinds of people in the world, the strong and the weak.
Ooh.
4.5.
Whoa, I was gonna go like 1 or 2 on that too.
The businessman and the manufacturer are much more important to society than the artist and the professor.
0.
1.
Is 0 an option?
I don't believe so.
I was just making my point very clear.
Oh, okay.
No, that's a 1.
I could go on because there's actually a number of these, but
this is actually
this is really
can you send me this? I would.
This is like a dark citizenship test.
Most people don't realize how much our lives are controlled by plots hatched in secret places. 1 to 6.
3.
4.
I'm going to admit that's
4
probably a 6.
I was gonna say at least 4 because of what I've been learning about campaign finances, if nothing else.
Many of our dreams and thoughts could not be told to others because they are too coarse and dirty.
1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
1. I don't like dirty.
I don't like. Yeah.
It's got some connotations.
Nowadays, with so many different kinds of people moving around and mixing together, a person has to protect himself, especially carefully against catching an infection or disease from them.
1.
Ugh.
I'm a healthy guy. I get my vaccines. I'm good to go.
That's how you're taking that? That's how you're interpreting that question?
That's like a question designed to point to every possible demographic.
So the F scale is debatable, and they've tried to hone in further.
What is the purpose of that?
Well, so the point
read it
is
again.
that,
Read it again.
Yeah.
Read it one more time.
Oh, that one?
I guess I
Yeah.
might have misinterpreted this then.
Think of it in terms of
Nowadays,
race and sexuality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, at the time, I think that was probably what they were saying about Jewish people in Germany. But nowadays, with so many different kinds of people moving around and mixing together, a person has to protect himself especially carefully against catching an infection or disease from them.
See, I interpreted that the first time as like, oh no, be careful, you're gonna like catch, you're gonna catch malaria from somebody that hopped a plane and came
That's
over.
like weirdly wholesome.
And then the second time you read that, I was like, oh, I got to be careful not to catch like an STD from somebody because
Yeah,
so many
yeah.
people are
And
going around.
the word mixing is a big red
Yeah.
flag in there.
I was gonna say that sounds like a racist undertone type thing.
So just like there's no like, you might list 14 things that were in classic fascism, but not across every country that was fascist. It's sort of the same concept, I believe, which is the idea that they went and they looked at the polls of the people that went Nazi the first time, and they found that they tended to be sixes for many of these, but not all of them. But many of these questions, even good liberals or libertarians or centrists or other, might give a six to some of these. And so, where do we fall on the fascism scale? And it's the total score that supposedly makes you the most susceptible to be like the good Germans who ended up not being so good under a charismatic fascist leader. And I find it compelling.
So a low score is better. Or a high score
You're
is
not
more fascist.
susceptible. Yeah. In terms of a population, susceptibility, not that you are or aren't.
Yeah.
In fact, the basic
That's a fair
idea here is
distinction, yeah.
nobody's fascist per se. They're simply susceptible to have their switch flipped when a fascist takes a position where he could have power.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it gives us an out because it lets us say, well, look, I mean, the people who voted a certain way were simply more susceptible to having their switches flipped, and they can perhaps have their switches flipped back. They're not bad people. If we say they're fascists, then that becomes right a certain kind of characterization that's hard to then, But if you say, well, it's not your fault, you were more susceptible. We're all susceptible if the right conditions come along. Then I feel like that's a more helpful way to
Is there an easy
navigate.
way to like search up those? Because I'm actually very curious now.
Just look up F scale, F
Okay.
scale questionnaire.
And it was Adorno?
It was Adorno helped lead it with these other data scientists at the time.
Interesting.
I would love to do a project on that. I'd love to do like a film on just the F scale. I think that'd
I
be
feel like I don't know, like spreading that survey would be super interesting.
Yeah. Huh.
yeah.
Awesome.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Can I say one more? I know I've
Yeah,
talked a
Yes,
lot,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
Please.
in terms of this question of having your switch flipped, so there was an incredible but largely forgotten feminist journalist from the 20s and 30s. She actually did the first interview with Adolf when he simply became party leader of the Nazis, not even when he had gained any power. And she wrote a really disparaging profile piece on him, and then she was no longer allowed in Germany.
Whoa.
But her name was Dorothy Thompson, and she was married to the guy who wrote the big warning from the time about fascism in America, the "It Can Happen Here" book. So you may have heard of.
Mhm.
What was his name? Sinclair Lewis. So anyway,
Yes.
so the two of them, they ran in like New York circles and elite circles, and so she wrote an article called "Who Goes Nazi." And this was before we'd officially entered the war, but when like Europe was at war with the Nazis. And she claimed that her and Sinclair Lewis would play this party game with their elite friends where they would attempt to guess like which Americans would go Nazi in a crisis. And she wrote, what did she write here? Germans may be more susceptible to Nazism than most people, but I doubt it. It appeals to a certain kind of mind. Their race, color, creed, or social condition is not the criterion, it's something in them. Kind, good, happy, gentlemanly, secure people, you'll never make Nazis out of them. Now, listen to this and tell me if this sounds like anybody that gravitate towards the White House currently. But the frustrated and humiliated intellectual, the rich and scared speculator, the spoiled son, the labor tyrant, the fellow who has achieved success by smelling out the winds of success, they would all go Nazi in a crisis. It's anecdotal.
That's
She
a lot of
wasn't a
ways to describe
scientist.
Elon Musk.
Yeah. The people who came out of the woodwork to support, I smell it. And I think at this point, debating the whole thing is sort of behind. I think you either see it or you don't. Anyone who hasn't seen it at this point isn't going to see it. And those who see it aren't going to unsee it. And that's not really helpful, but there you have it. That would be my concluding thought.
Interesting.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I will say, again, to Dylan's, benefit, I don't know that I would agree with all of those being inherently, right-wing, modern-day thinkers. I think some of them could go on either side. But that's... it's a lot of ways to describe Elon Musk. Fair enough. I think that's a good place to end it.
Interesting.
All
Thank you so
right.
much,
Yes,
by the way.
thank
That
you
was
so much.
very
Can I-
informative.
All
Awesome
right.
talking with y'all. Thanks for...
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciated it.
All right.
That was so cool.
Uh-huh.
That was such an interesting conversation.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts before we end this one?
I think this was a great discussion. I know that I definitely took a lot away from it. And I enjoyed a good discussion. I think we hit on a lot of good points. So that's what I would say.
And now he will be denouncing Trump as a fascist. In 3, 2, 1.
Crickets, 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 crickets.
It was an attempt. I made an attempt.
I appreciate the effort,
Yeah.
truly.
Alrighty.
We'll see you all in the next one. Have a good one.